Thank you, Chairman Hastings, Ranking Member Markey. I appreciate you taking the opportunity to schedule this important hearing on amendments to the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act. As we all know, conserving our natural resources for generations to come is a top priority, not only for myself, but I know for members of this committee and others. And I grew up around the Chesapeake Bay, which we all know is a national treasure, and one that depends on the health of our ecosystem and the resources that are within it. The Bay is also an economic engine, which is critical to local jobs and communities similar to those in other coastal regions around this great country. Preserving these resources requires attention to detail, to science, resource allocation, and management. Today I'm here to address the need for the House to pass H.R. 2304, the Fisheries Science Improvement Act. And I'm proud to author this legislation, which seeks to ensure that the management of saltwater fisheries is based on sound science. H.R. 2304 addresses a timely issue that must be addressed before the end of this year to prevent uninformed fishery management decisions that would impose undue catch limits to the detriment of recreational and commercial fishermen. And I want to thank the 34 bipartisan co-sponsors of H.R. 2304, many of whom are members of the Natural Resources Committee. And this legislation is supported by the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, along with a broad coalition of industry and conservation organizations. Additionally, this week, Senators Bill Nelson and Marco Rubio introduced companion legislation in the Senate. When the Magnuson-Stevens Act was reauthorized in 2006, Congress assumed that ending overfishing and requiring strict annual catch limits, known as ACLs, would result in better long-term health and vitality for our nation's marine resources. Congress assumed that improvements in data collection and scientific assessments would result in healthier resources and even more recreational fishing to help fuel this nation's economy. However, since 2006, the collection of fisheries data has not kept up with the pace of requirements of Magnuson. The lack of adequate data has caused problems with several major fisheries around the country, including black sea bass, amberjack, and South Atlantic red snapper fisheries. For the past 5 years or so, it appears that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has not collected adequate data to implement the requirements in Magnuson. Because of the lack of data and a rapidly approaching deadline, they are being forced to move ahead without the necessary science. The agency faces a December 31, 2011 deadline to put annual catch limits in place for all 521 fish stocks and stock complexes under federal management, most of which have never been scientifically assessed. Despite the significant lack of scientific data, NOAA is likely to impose strict limits on fish about which they have little or no information. These limits will also be applied to fish that are very clearly highly abundant. Because of the lack of data, NOAA Fisheries is forced to guess and to make assumptions about the status of many fish stocks. That was certainly not the intent of Magnuson-Stevens. The Fisheries Science Improvement Act has 3 key provisions. First, if the agency hasn't done a stock assessment in the past 5 years and there's no indication that overfishing is occurring, there's no requirement to set an annual catch limit. Second, to avoid removing the fish species from management and leave them in the jurisdiction of the agency, our bill allows the agency to put certain fish into an ecosystem category. This classification is already informally in use by the agency, but without specific parameters. This bill statutorily authorizes the category and broadens the eligibility for stocks of fish that can be placed in the category. Finally, the Fisheries Science Improvement Act gives NOAA Fisheries 3 years to go back and work with regional councils to figure out how to implement science-based overfishing measures that are appropriate for each region and each species of fish. This bill is very concise, simple, and targeted. We have a very significant and specific problem with how NOAA is implementing Magnuson-Stevens. Congress must act accordingly. Without congressional action, arbitrary decisions affecting millions of anglers and thousands of businesses will continue to be made. I urge my colleagues to support sound science and resource management by supporting H.R. 2304, the Fisheries Science Improvement Act. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
I thank the